What if everything you think is real actually isn't? I promise you, this episode will change the way you see the world and yourself. And there's only one person on the planet who's qualified to deliver this message. How many people do you know have worked as a filmmaker crafting stories for a living, studied propaganda inside North Korea, one of the most dangerous, repressive regimes in history, and also helped companies like Google and Coca-Cola build the campaigns that shape how millions of people around the world think and buy? There is only one person who has done all of these things, and that person is Owen Fitzpatrick. And after all that experience, you know what he found? The most powerful propaganda machine he has ever encountered wasn't in North Korea, it wasn't in a boardroom, it was inside his own head. He calls it inner propaganda, the idea that your brain runs a persuasion campaign on you every single day. It manufactures certainty, it defends beliefs that stopped being true years ago, and it keeps you loyal to a version of yourself that you never actually chose. This episode isn't about the propaganda that exists out there. It's about the propaganda already running in your own head and what happens the moment you finally catch it lying to you. This is the story of Owen Fitzpatrick. Welcome to Big Swings Only. Are you ready to take your business's marketing to the next level? Meet Brevo, the all-in-one marketing and CRM platform built to help you connect with customers, boost engagement, and grow your business smarter. With Brevo, you manage all of your customer interactions in one place, nurture leads with their built-in CRM, reach your audience through email and SMS, and keep them coming back with powerful automations. But here's where it gets really exciting. Meet Aura, Brevo's AI assistant. Aura helps you to craft smarter campaigns by suggesting personalized content, optimizing send times, and even analyzing performance data to help you improve your strategy in real time. It's like having a marketing expert on your team 24/7. And of course, Brevo offers advanced analytics, seamless integrations, and AI-driven personalization. Everything you need to create multi-channel campaigns that hit the mark every time. Get started for free today or use code ANYTHING50 to save 50% on starter and standard plans for the first 3 months of an annual subscription. Just head to www.brevo.com/anything and take your marketing further with Brevo and Aura. You had 8 books and now this is your 9th?
This is my 10th, nine books, and it's the 10th. Yeah.
Unbelievable. How dare I? So what compels a person first to write 9 and then to write the 10th? What was missing in the first 9 that you needed to get out in number 10?
So the first 9 books have been on like different topics. So for instance, some of them I co-wrote with the co-creator of NLP or Neuro-Linguistic Programming, Dr. Richard Bandler. So a number of the books I've been lucky enough to work with him, and he's a great mentor of mine. So I co-authored a number of books with him on different aspects of NLP. I also wrote a few books myself in terms of I had a TV show when I was about 15 years ago in Ireland. Where I go around the country working with people, helping them to be more productive. I also did a lot of work in terms of charisma and teaching people how to communicate with more presence and more engaging. And I wrote a book on that called The Charismatic Edge. So I guess I've written a number of books on different topics, and some of them have been more, biographical, some of them being more tips or tricks, some of them being more framework, and a couple of them were stories, almost like, allegories, right? I always wanted to focus on the area that I've been most specialized in. So my new book, Inner Propaganda, is the most important book from the perspective that it's all of the work that I've done over the last 25, 30 years of my career. I started very young, and I was a teenager and working with clients already in terms of doing therapy with clients. That was even before I did my undergrad and master's and stuff. And I spent a lot of time focusing on beliefs because beliefs made a huge difference to me when I was younger. So this book is everything to do with beliefs. In it, I talk about, a double agent from World War II who changed the course of the entire war by the way in which he communicated messages and how he was persuasive in the use of deception. I talk about different Irish revolutionary heroes. I talk about a lot of different business leaders and how they used persuasive tactics in order to be able to change minds. And it really comes down to the big mistakes a lot of people make when it comes to influencing others. And the main thing was also the travel that I did to North Korea, to Iran, to Afghanistan, to Rwanda, interviewing people there and trying to learn everything I could about propaganda. To me, I've been like so interested and obsessed with finding out everything there is to know about beliefs, and then taking my own, as a psychologist, my own, scientific background to try to identify what's going on. And I suppose the main gist of the book in a nutshell is that the greatest lies, or the most dangerous ideas, don't come from the screen, they come from the mirror. And it's what I call inner propaganda, the fact that we convince ourselves. One of the things that you say, Kwame, so elegantly, is about the most important negotiation you ever had was the one that you have with yourself. And that's something that I arrived to, but it never felt that it was just like an inner dialogue, if you get me. I always felt it was more like a multi-log, or when I felt a certain way, I was completely, and I know you do a lot of work around the importance of emotions in negotiation, I was like brainwashed by how I felt. And it felt much more like there was propaganda happening there. And the more I learned, in being in North Korean places, the more I saw the parallels between the two. And that's really why I'm super excited about the book, because the idea is something that I've been trying to communicate across to folks for many, many years. And it's certainly the area that I'm most fascinated with and love to talk about.
There is so much to explore. That was probably the most fascinating 3 minutes of 2026 for me. For the people listening who are just going to listen auditorially, I wish you could have seen our eyes, me and our producer Simone, our eyes when you said North Korea. We're like, excuse me. So we'll get to the negotiation and psychology stuff in a little bit, but North Korea, please explain.
Yeah. So I suppose for me, I've traveled, extensively. I've been obsessed with going to as many different places as possible. And a lot of times it wasn't just for work. So I have worked in a lot of different places, but I traveled to just over 100 countries. And some of the countries that I wanted to most go to were places where I was completely and totally intrigued about what it would be like to be there. So obviously North Korea topped the list. So in 2011 or so, I spent, a week or two in North Korea. Had to leave my phone outside the country because, they don't allow you to bring outside stuff in. Can't get on the internet. It was actually great I definitely recommend it from a focus perspective. You not having your phone for a week or two, it's like, it should be like a place people go to meditate. It's like, oh, I'm going to go to North Korea to be able to, tune out from the world, right? But when you go there, obviously you only see what they show you, right? So they very much control the information. You've got two guides with you the entire time and a driver that brings you to places. You go to, nice enough hotel. They bring you to the places. You don't get any time to roam yourself. And they bring you to all the historical places where they teach you the real history and the real story. And I loved it. I mean, I got an individual tour as opposed to a group tour because I wanted to be completely immersed in it. And it was, still one of the most enjoyable trips I ever took. I spent a lot of time talking to my two guides. There's one in particular, and we had a number of conversations. And one of the most memorable ones was we were sitting down having a drink in the hotel, and she was, talking. She was like, "So tell me more about what you do." And I said, "I'm a psychologist." And she said, "What does that mean?" And I said, "Well, I'd never been in a situation where I had to explain, normally when I say I'm a psychologist, people say, oh, so what are you reading in me? What do you think? You're diagnosing me, are you?" Or something like that. But no one's ever said, "What's that?" So I had to describe, well, I work with people in terms of their minds. And she goes, "You mean you're a doctor? You open that?" I'm like, no, 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 no. I, have conversations with them and help them to feel better. And then the more we talked about it, the more she sort of said, she started sharing her challenges. And when I arrived in North Korea, I had kind of not an arrogance, I won't say, but I certainly had a misconception where I was like, they're all brainwashed and they go around and they just fall for all this and that and the other. And they're very different to us because they're cut off from the world in terms of from the media perspective. They don't get a lot of the information in. And instead, she was super sharp. The same girl, actually, a few days before that, when they collected me from the airport, she was in the front passenger seat. There was the other girl next to me, and then the driver. And she's talking perfect English, like absolutely perfect English. And I said, "Do you mind me asking, where did you learn your English? It's so good." And she goes, "Yeah, I spent every summer in the UK." And I said, "Really?" And with a total deadpan response, she goes, "No, I was being sarcastic." And my mind was blown because I was thinking to myself, this is the most incredible. I did not expect that at all. I was shocked. I was stunned because, once again, I was expecting a brainwashed person with no sense of humor. And what I found was pretty much the opposite. So when we talked about psychology, she started sharing some of her struggles and challenges, which weren't a million miles away from the kinds of struggles or challenges that anyone has in work, obviously higher stakes for her. But she was talking about it, and I was, asking questions and inquiring, and using curiosity and working with her and helping her to see things differently. And at the very end, after a couple of hours, and she kind of shared a lot about what it was like to live in North Korea. So I learned a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have gotten in any other context. But at the end, she says, "I think I know what you do," and it's the nicest compliment I've ever gotten. She goes, "I think you might be good at it." And I was like, "Thank you," from that perspective. So overall, it was an amazing experience. Obviously, their history when I went to the places, very in your face, very strong propaganda. But here's the most important takeaway that I got from it. When I left there, and I was in the States, I think a few months afterwards, and a friend asked me, he sort of said, "It must have been crazy over there with all the propaganda." And my response to him was, well, in North Korea, they've got one point of view on what's going on. In America, it only seems like people have two. I said, so that's just one extra perspective than the North Koreans do. So it's very easy for us to sort of label this country under this regime, they're brainwashed. But the reality is we're all brainwashed. We all have our own inner propaganda going on. And my goal and the work that I do and the work that you do as well, Kwame, is to try to help people to understand themselves better so they recognize where they're going wrong. And that could be like from a cognitive bias perspective, or it could be the emotional hijacking. I know you talk about, the influence or the impact of your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex and the combination. And so what we need to do is recognize that the first thing I say is, whenever someone says propaganda is a terrible problem over there, I always want them to recognize that unless we recognize the impact propaganda has on us, we are never, ever going to find a way to be able to communicate effectively with them. And we certainly have enough hope in terms of influence them as well. So, yeah, so that's some experiences from North Korea, which I'm very fond of.
Brilliant. Yeah, once you say North Korea, I've got more questions, and I'm glad that I asked. This was fantastic. It's such a paradigm shift. You're right. Pretty much everything you said was pretty shocking,
Yeah.
pretty unique. But again, I think it's really important for us to have these opportunities, whether it's us physically traveling other places or having opportunities to listen to people like you who have to see a different paradigm, to see the world in a different way. Because when it comes to fully understanding the effect these messages have on us, we need to understand which messages we're marinating in day to day, and then how that has a modifying effect on our perspective. And if we're always looking at other people and saying, look at these folks, these sheep out there, they're brainwashed.
Yeah.
Well, there is some group or faction that is saying the same thing about you and the people who think like you as well. And so in order to fully understand the power of propaganda, whether external or internal, we have to have the cognitive humility to recognize that no matter who you are listening, we are all going to be affected by this in one way or another.
And I think that's a really important point, Kwame, because so often what we do is we use our rationalization and we use our intelligence and we use that as being the very reason why, okay, we're all brainwashed, but they're more brainwashed, right? So we can find the reasoning, but ultimately we are all the victim of whatever information we've taken in, plus whatever feelings we felt at the time. There's a concept, there's a wonderful neuroscientist called Lisa Feldman Barrett who talks about affective realism, which is basically that our feelings or emotions dictate the way in which we perceive realities. So I usually talk about the notion of being hangry, right? That means you're angry when you're hungry, right? Or tangry, you're angry when you're tired, you're snappy in the morning. Or I call it tanxious whenever you're like overthinking because you haven't slept and now your brain starts to imagine all sorts of crazy stuff. Well, all of the feelings we feel dictate the way in which we perceive the world. And so from that perspective, the problem a lot of people have is that they're living through this sort of lens where they interpret everything through their emotions. And so it's not just the quantity of the data that they have, it's not the amount of information they have, it's also the feelings that affect the way in which that information comes across. Because you could give people, and we all know about confirmation bias, you look for evidence to prove your conclusions are true. But we could have all the time in the world to listen to, I could turn on CNN and Fox News, but based upon whatever my bias is, I'm still going to interpret it through my own internal propaganda. So to an extent, it doesn't matter how much exposure I have to it, my brain will still look at it going, oh my goodness, they lie all the time. I can't believe it. What are they doing? So it's really critical, to your point, we engage in that cognitive humility or intellectual humility that allows us to go, hang on a second, maybe I need to, as Adam Grant would say, think again, rethink my assumptions. Maybe I need to recognize that there's more information. And when we start to think like that, and I think that's kind of what a lot of the work that you do and Negotiate Anything and in your book, what you share is helping people that if you want to negotiate better, if you want to influence other people, step one is you need to understand how you're being influenced yourself. And part of that influence is not just what you say, but it's the feelings that you feel as you think the thoughts that you think. And that's kind of where I get to when I look at how do minds change? How do we change beliefs? What goes on into the mechanics? It's not what people think, and it's certainly not the way in which most people act.
Agreed. Agreed. And kind of tying into what you just said, it's not what most people think. I want to get us a nice little operational definition for propaganda, because I think that our basic understanding is not the way that you would see it. And
Sure.
then also, what are the things that people misunderstand the most about that term, especially as it relates to the way that you're approaching it in your book?
Sure. So I think to start off with, I have a very simple. I quoted, a number of different definitions of propaganda in the book. But the way I like to think about propaganda is propaganda really works based upon three elements. It works based upon sort of the state media. So you organize the information flow that comes into whatever a person's mind is. You're also engaging in what we call indoctrination. So that's you're indoctrinating people so that they all start to see themselves with certain identities. And then finally, truth engineering. You manufacture the truth and you build the narratives and the stories of what's true so that the world around everyone, they start to see that and think that and believe that. And so those elements of the state media, of indoctrination, and of truth engineering is really what I believe propaganda is made up of. It's the story that we convince people of, and as a result of that, we're able to control them, or that's at least the aim or the goal. Inner propaganda looks at the same three elements, but does it from the inside of our mind. And I call this the inner state media, which is to do with how we feel. Internal indoctrination, which is to do with who we are, our identity, what fits in with us. And then lastly, truth engineering, which also is what we do inside our head through the way in which we tell ourselves or sell to ourselves stories, and also the way in which we use reason and rationalization. So in a nutshell, the main framework I work and what all my work is about, in order for an idea to work, or an idea for us to believe in an idea, or for an idea to change or a belief to change, number one, it must feel right. So it must feel right to us, and that might mean that it fits in with what we already feel is true, and that word feel is the most important word there. Or it might mean that we want to believe something, and because our feelings of desire makes us want to believe something, we make it fit. Number two, it has to fit in. That means fit in with who we are, fit in with the groups that we're part of, fit in with our cultural background perhaps, fit in with our sense of meaning, fit in with our moral aspirations, the kind of people that we think. And only if it feels right and fits in, then we will make it make sense. So the making sense piece is the third piece. And this is where the storytelling comes in. This is where the logical reasoning, Aristotle's syllogisms, that's where all of that works. And the problem is, as you well know, Kwame, most people start from the making sense. if I want to convince you, I'll do what Adam Grant calls logic bully, and I'll say, Kwame, let me tell you the 600 reasons why I'm right and you're wrong. And I expect you to turn around and go, you know what? I was feeling very strongly about this, but now that you've given me the logical reasoning, oh my goodness, my mind has changed. Doesn't happen 90% of the time. It only happens when the stakes are low, or it happens when the person is open and kind of wants to change the belief in the first place. But it needs to feel right. It needs to fit in. And once it does, then our brains can go. And that's also why you can have people that disagree with you, and you ask yourself, how can this person be so intelligent and they believe this? It's because they're so intelligent that they're good enough to create an argument to back up what feels right to them and what fits in for them, so they can maintain their identity as being part of that group that they're in. And the most important thing we can do is to focus, and you do this a lot in negotiations, Kwame, but focus on how are you making them feel and what is the identity that you're working with. And if you can get those two things right, then the making sense piece is, so much easier, because once you get people on that side, their brains are already wired to make sense of things, already wired to use logic to prove themselves as true. But those first two pieces, they really matter. And I think they're much more underrated than they need to be.
Oh, Owen, I hate this answer. Let me tell you why, man. You're ruining my week. I have a keynote on Friday called Negotiating Reality: How to Change Minds in a Post-Truth World. And now I feel like I need to go back and rewrite the whole damn thing. This was a masterclass. Unbelievable. We've got to recap this. Okay, so we have three elements of propaganda. We have state media, we have indoctrination, we have truth engineering. The same three things are reflected in our inner propaganda. The emotions would be the equivalent of state media. We have our own perception of identity, and then truth engineering is nothing but the stories that we choose to believe, the reason we put behind it, and the rationalization. And in order for beliefs to change, it has to feel right. We need to want to believe it. It needs to fit in with the groups that we aspire to be part of. So there's a bit of status element there. And then if all of those things are met, then it makes sense. So what I'm hearing is that the way that we try to persuade people, especially on sensitive topics, simply doesn't make sense and is guaranteed for failure. So we're saying, hey, listen, after this conversation, here's what I'm selling you. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of data that will make you feel really bad, where if you do accept this, you will be outcast from your group, and you will lose all the status you worked hard to achieve, and you'll be put at the bottom of our status ladder because before you talk to me, you were really dumb. Now you just got a little bit smart, and now you can be part of our group where you will be the least of us. Do you accept? There's no way. So really, you've helped us to recognize the illogical elements of logical reasoning when it comes to persuasion. And then also, when you walked through these three elements of propaganda, state media, indoctrination, truth engineering, it made me wonder, what isn't propaganda?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I love the way you recapped that. It was so clear. And everything you said was exactly what I was, conveying. So beautiful recap of everything. It really was excellent. But with regards to what is propaganda, I would argue that it doesn't even matter, because ultimately the propaganda is happening in us. And so we're constantly convincing ourselves of beliefs. We are selling, like people talk about, it's the story you tell yourself. No, it's the story you sell to yourself. I tell myself lots of stories, but I don't believe all of them. So, if I tell myself a story, I might or might not believe it. The ones that I believe, the stories that I believe, are the ones that I've effectively sold to myself because they feel right. Like I talk about, there's five types of truth. And as soon as I say 5 types of truth, immediately people push back. But here's the problem. We all talk about truth as if there's a universal type of truth, and that's the one we're talking about. So whenever people say this is true, if you talk politically, they say this person is horrible, or this person is a Nazi, or this person is a communist, or whatever the term is. That you're saying it as if it's true. But there's different types of truth. So for example, there's objective truth, which we all know. And objective truth is if you use that truth, you can make effective predictions. So if you build a plane, you need to be using objective truth to ensure that the plane is built accordingly. That's the way engineering works, as well as science works. The second type of truth is past truth. And this is that I remember something happening. So I remember the time I was doing this. I remember my TEDx talk. I remember when I was in North Korea, right? This is my memory. But as we know, our memories are notoriously unreliable, and we don't remember things as they are. We're constantly revising them because we don't remember actually. We reconstruct. All of these are reconstructions. So our past memories, we feel as if they're true. We talk about them as if they're true, but they're not necessarily true. But because we talk about them as if they're true, the functional way of talking about truth is useful. Because if I'm talking to you and you tell me of something that happens, I need to respect the fact that that's true for you, even if it's not an objective truth. Then we have the emotional truth, which is, well, what feels right to you? And often we talk about going with our gut. The problem with going with your gut is sometimes you think you're going with your gut, but you're actually going with some other feeling that you're feeling. And it's hard to be able to parse out the difference between the two. But if it feels true, then oftentimes you will talk about it as if it is true. I just know he's that kind of person. I just know she won't listen, right? That's because it feels like that. Then there's also shared truth, which is if me and you agree, and this is how businesses are formed. It's how we got the notion or the concept of money. Yuval Noah Harari in his great book Sapiens talks about how, money is a story that we all agreed on, a shared belief. So is an organization, and lots of different aspects of reality is what we all agree on is true. So that's a shared belief. And once again, if I'm talking to you, you don't turn around to me and say, no, I only believe this because we all agreed on it. It's true for you. So if it's true for you, I need to think of it as a truth. But again, it's not the same as an objective truth. And then the final one is desired truth. A lot of us believe in what we want to believe, and that gets us up in the morning sometimes. And in the best cases, Sarah Blakely, who built Spanx, and Melanie Perkins, who built Canva, they had no right to believe that they were going to be successful, right? Everything was stacked against them, and yet still they believed that they were going to be successful. And obviously their skill, their talent, their intelligence, their creativity, all that was the reason. But if they didn't believe it first, it wouldn't have happened. James Dyson's another example, more than 5,000 prototypes before he was successful. You need to be deluded. You need to have a desired belief that gets you going. The problem is, if you keep going to X Factor and your voice destroys eardrums because it's so awful, and you believe because you want to be a successful singer that you're going to waste a lot of times, and you're going to ruin a lot of hearing, right, for a lot of eardrums. So we need to recognize that not everything is the same type of truth, because when we look at objective truth, if we start to package everything like it's just true universally, we can't have meaningful conversations. And the more you have this intellectual cognitive humility we talked about earlier, Kwame, the more we can step back and go, hang on a second. Am I believing this because it's objectively true and I've verified it? Do I believe it because I agree with other people? Do I believe it because that's how I remember it? Do I believe it because it feels right to me? Do I believe it because I want to believe it? And by the way, sometimes all of those truths, believing it's true, could be great, and sometimes they can be disastrous. Even sometimes objective truth, believing that can be disastrous. So the key is to recognize these things. And once we do, we start to understand that the propaganda is in us. And it doesn't mean that people don't have responsibility not to engineer it, but the more we take agency over it, the more that can allow us to ensure that the wrong kind of propaganda from the outside doesn't get in, or at least doesn't influence us as much. And then we are able to direct our own propaganda so we can make better choices, negotiate better, and make more of an impact.
Fascinating. And you said something that I want to go deeper on, because you said there are times where believing objective truth could be disastrous. Could you help the audience see one of those situations? I think that would be really helpful.
Sure. So I'll give a really simple example.
Scaling a business takes the right expertise at the right time. Not eventually, right when you need it. That's the whole idea behind Upwork. It's the one-stop platform to find, hire, and pay expert freelancers across web and software development, data analytics, marketing, business operations, and more. Over 125 categories of specialized talent, so growing teams can move faster without waiting on a full-time hire to get there. You browse real profiles, review past work, and get help scoping the role, so you're hiring with confidence and getting started quickly, not guessing. And if you want the best of the best, Business Plus unlocks the top 1% of talent on Upwork with AI-powered shortlisting that matches you to the right freelancer in under 6 hours. Upwork also takes the operational hassle off your plate. Contracts, payments, all handled in one place, so you can spend your time actually running your business. Thousands of growing businesses already trust Upwork for everything from one-off projects to ongoing support. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com to connect with top talent ready to help your business grow. That's UPWORK.com. Upwork.com. I was on Whatnot last week, scrolling through a live sale, and I ended up walking away with a pair of sneakers I'd been eyeing for months at a price that actually made sense. That's the thing about Whatnot. You almost never pay full price, and the whole experience feels less like shopping and more like hanging out with people who genuinely know their stuff. And here's what I want you to hear. I use Whatnot, and if you've got something to sell, you should too. Whatnot is the largest live selling marketplace in the country. Fashion, beauty, collectibles, electronics, even things you wouldn't expect. It doesn't matter if your business is big, small, or just an idea. People selling on Whatnot sell 10 times more than on other major marketplaces because you're not just listing a product, you're building real connections with the people buying it. The numbers back it up too. The number of sellers making over $1 million a year on Whatnot has doubled. This isn't just a side hustle. For a lot of sellers, live selling has crossed the line into full-time work. Buyers are spending more than an hour a day on the app, engaged, buying, and coming back for more. You go live, show off what you've got in real time, and turn what you love into real income. Search Whatnot, that's WHATNOT, in the App Store, download it, and you can start selling right away.
Sometimes whenever like a lot of times we praise being honest and facts and stuff like that. If you take a, for example, relationship and someone says, how do I look in this? People are going to have different points of view. But when people ask me for feedback, I don't immediately give them feedback. So someone says to me, what do you think of this, project that I've done? Or what do you think of this book? Or what do you think of, my new song? Or what do you think of, this dress or whatnot? Before I answer that question, I'm asking myself the question, what kind of truth do they want? Do they want me to tell them, actually, that dress, it makes you look awful. Actually, that song, that you've got zero talent. Actually. Now, the truth of the matter is, or for that expression, when I'm listening to what they ask for, I want to know what they really want to know, because my goal is to be the best friend I can be. My goal is to be the best mentor I can be. My goal is to be the best coach I can be. So depending on my role, depending on what they need, depending on what they ask for, I'm not going to go around telling people the objective truth all the time. Because ultimately, if you're in a negotiation, as you well know, but you give your honest opinion all the time, that's going to negatively impact you. Like if someone asks you in a negotiation, the first step going, what's the most that you'll pay for this? And you just give them the objective truth, you're doomed, right? Forget about anchoring. So the idea is that an objective truth, and people might push back on this saying you always need to be honest. Well, I'd argue, okay, I can promise you, if we were to look into to everyone in the world's life, there's certain situations where we're not honest. And if we are, or we believe we're honest, we're not honest with ourselves. And so the key is to recognize that and to understand that objective truth, we want to get it. And sometimes that's the most, and most of the time, it's good to look for that, because that's the place where we can make better predictions. Ultimately, that's where it comes down to. Getting the objective truth helps us to be better at making predictions. But so much of the world is influenced by desired truth, right? Politically, look at it. I mean, facts are, for any politician, facts are like a nice to have maybe sometimes, but either way, once they get into power, they're just going to point to all the facts that they want anyway, right? So facts and objective truth are not necessarily going to dictate how great a president or prime minister will be. So we have to understand the impact of all of the different types of truth if we are to be able to deal with them and to be able to do our best in the society that we find ourselves in.
I want to go back to the 5 different types of truths. And one of the things that you mentioned was how important it is to at least respect the person's truth. And I think one of the things that will help us in this conversationally is not to hold on to our truth with a type of religious zealotry that doesn't just elevate our truth, but also demonizes the
Mhm.
truth of somebody else. But recognize that truth is going to depend on perspective. It's going to depend on lived experience. It's going to depend on emotionality, all of these types of things. And so for me, when I think about truth, I think about it as the stories people choose to believe. And when I can see it as that and say it's not necessarily objective factual truth, even though they might describe it that way. This is the story this person is believing right now. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. And then what I'm going to do in the conversation is reflect back my understanding of their story. Even if I don't agree, I can let them know that I see them and I
Mhm.
can understand them. And when you think about this, this is critical to persuasion because for the person who's listening, think about a time where you were effectively persuaded by somebody who disrespected you in the process. It's
Mhm.
probably very few times. And like when you recognize that a person's perspective of how much you respect them will depend upon how you handle their truth when they share it,
Mhm.
it helps us to recognize the true difficulty of persuasion. Because if all we needed to do was recite facts for persuasion, then we would just send Excel documents and fact
Yeah.
sheets and all of these things. That would be it, but it's not. The hardest part is having that humility to give the other person space and give them some degree of respect to see them, even if we don't agree with them.
I love that point, and I think a lot of times we talk to other people as if they're like ChatGPT. So if you ever been in this situation where you talk to your AI bot and you ask it an opinion about something, and then it gives you an opinion, and then you push back. Almost always, I push back. ChatGPT goes, yeah, you know what? You're right. I was wrong. Actually, this is the situation. It's very, it acquiesces very easily. It leans in. It does whatever it takes to make sure that we've got a good relationship going. That's not how real human beings communicate. If someone disagrees with you, you don't just give them logic and they turn around and they go, actually, you're correct. Unless the two of you have that shared respect where you're both trying to figure out, let's say in this context, the objective truth. But more often than not, that doesn't suffice. There's a great technique that I think you've mentioned or certainly discussed at a prior podcast called deep canvassing. And this is the notion of where in the like 2000s or so, they were trying to get more people to vote for, gay marriage. And this laboratory set up this notion or this technique of deep canvassing. There's been some literature about it as well. And what the approach in a nutshell was about was the people would go to the door, the canvassers would go to the door, and instead of just telling them why they should vote for it, they would say, hey, we'd love to talk to you about, have you got a few minutes? We'd love to talk to you about gay marriage. They would listen, and they would ask them questions, and here's what they would do: listen. And the person would then tell them why they don't believe in gay marriage, and they would just ask questions. And they would allow the person to talk. They would not disagree. They would not say, what are you talking about? You're insane. They're not the statistic. They would let the person talk. And what happens is the person then starts to go in. And to your point, Kwame, the story that they're telling themselves about what is true, the more they get in and the more that they're communicating, being asked these questions, the more they're starting to get doubts because they can hear themselves giving certain contradictions. And they start to know, well, I thought that, but actually this doesn't make sense. So they're actually noticing as they're sharing with the canvasser their beliefs, they're noticing that there's inaccuracies in the story. And then instead of disagreeing with them, the canvasser responds and says, let me show you my perspective and why I believe what I believe. But it's super respectful. They feel this person is not trying to change my mind. And that showed a significant increase compared to all other approaches of how many people voted. It changes minds. And it kind of makes sense for you, obviously makes sense, Kwame, because a big part of it is if you want a successful negotiation, huge amount of it is how does that person feel about you? And how do they feel about your feelings about them? And if those two are right, you're going to figure out the way. You're going to find the right negotiation. But it all comes down to the feelings first and foremost. And being respected by someone is part of your identity as well. So that's how the fits in piece works. Because if I feel disrespected, I'm a they to you. And if I'm a they to you, then whatever you say to me, I'm going to find my own way of making that nonsensical because I don't want to be a they. I don't want to agree with you because you're not in my tribe. You're not in my group. And so much of it comes down to how we feel. So much of it comes down to whether or not we fit in with the identity that we want. And so disrespect is one of the best ways to ensure that you never persuade anybody of anything.
Listeners, I disappeared for a little bit. And now I'm back. Connection is great. And you see what happens? What happens is my guest, Owen and Simone, they're sharing secrets behind my back. I've been working with Simone, what, 5 years? I've never heard you say this. I got the last part and you dared to say it without recording. How dare you? Okay, start again. This is great.
Okay.
So what
Well, the story is like
yeah.
this, Kwame. Owen was set to be to record on October, but I wanted to bring him. I did all was possible to bring him now because I loved his material. So what I was talking to him is the reason why I love it, because he talks about people in different realities that is very difficult to understand the other people's reality, right? So I was telling him that I have my own negotiation method. That because I come from Venezuela, I don't use arguments because arguments need us to share the same reality. So as we're not in the same reality, how can I convince you about Biden or Trump if you don't believe in democracy? So it's very difficult. So as we don't share the same reality, I don't think in for arguments in a negotiation. So I just bring demands to the negotiation table so that I make sure to not offend you with my arguments, and I don't give you the opportunity to have an argument or to attack my argument. So I just leave a demand. And if you have an argument, I accept the argument. I don't go against that, but I present my demand again. And then we start doing some concessions, but we don't talk about arguments because we will have always arguments. And it's very difficult to convince someone that is already convinced of other things.
Wow. Have you ever left a meeting thinking, that was productive, and then 10 minutes later you're pinging someone like, wait, what are we actually doing? Meetings are a mess, and Granola AI fixes that. I still remember the first time I saw my notes after using it. I was honestly surprised by how organized and complete they were. It didn't feel like I'd done any extra work, but somehow everything was just there. Here's how it works. You jot down rough notes like you usually would, and in the background, Granola AI securely transcribes the meeting. As soon as it ends, it turns all of it into clean, structured, actually useful notes. It runs right through your device's audio, so it fits seamlessly into whatever video tool you're already using. No setup, no awkward bots joining the call. It's just your normal meeting, but with superpowers. You actually get to listen instead of frantically typing every word, and you still walk away knowing exactly what was decided, who's doing what, and what comes next. If meetings are eating up your day, Granola is a no-brainer, and you can try it totally free for 3 months. Just head to granola.ai/Kwame. That's granola.ai/Kwame to get your time back. Get 3 months free at granola.ai/Kwame. If your brain is running at full capacity, to-do lists, errands, birthdays, figuring out what's for dinner on a random Tuesday, you know how exhausting it is to keep it all straight in your head. That was our house before we got a Skylight calendar. Now it all lives in one place. Skylight calendar is designed to bring families together for more time. It's an all-in-one digital smart calendar that syncs seamlessly with Google Calendar, Apple Calendar, Outlook, and more. With views you can customize daily, weekly, or monthly. What's made the biggest difference for us is the tasks feature. It's turned things like brushing teeth, homework, and chores into something kids actually want to check off instead of something we're constantly reminding them about. We manage events, chores, and grocery lists all in the same spot with a color assigned to each person in the family, so no one can claim they didn't know what they were supposed to do. And if you're not 100% thrilled within 4 months, you get a full refund, no questions asked. Families are better when they are working together. Right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to myskylight.com/Kwame. Go to myskylight.com/Kwame for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's myskylight.com/Kwame. Wow. Wow. So for you, you're completely outcome oriented in your negotiations. You're saying, okay, at the end of the day, whatever you say, this is what I need. If you can do that, that's great. If you can't, that's fine too. So you believe what you want to believe. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to respect it. I'm going to show you that I understand it. I'm not even going to argue. I think you presented some really good points. And now we have an opportunity to work together. These are my needs, and it sounds like your needs are this. How can we get it done?
Yes, alongside with a demonstration of power and willingness to cooperate. So I show you that I have power, meaning that I don't need you, or I can replace you, or I can make harm to you. And but anyways, I want to work with you, and I want to build a future together. So I
I,
make sure you don't have retaliation.
I have to say, what
Wow.
I love is I love the phrase, "I can make harm to you." That sounds so gangster. I'm
I
like,
know.
that's so cool. It's like, no messing about here. Listen, we can make this the easy way or the hard way. What I, what I,
Yes.
what I found as well, about what you mentioned, Simone, and I think this is really interesting from our conversation as well, Kwame, is it's the notion of separating the actual topic from the negotiator himself or herself. So the nature of it is that if you get into arguments, that it's about what I think and what I feel and what I believe versus you. Whereas when you talk about the ask or demand, you're really putting forward, we're talking about the topic here. And again, to your point, you're saying, look, I have the power in the sense of I've got a good best alternative to the negotiated agreement. But at the same time, I also am willing to work with you. So I really want to get it. But what I love about it is the presupposition that this is a thing we're talking about. This is not personal. This is not to do with how I feel about you or you feel. That's irrelevant. And that to me creates a sort of a psychological safety, a sort of a feeling that makes it feel okay and potentially feel right. But it avoids sort of antagonizing the person to the point where, they start to take it as some personal, slight if they don't get the results. So that's what I really like about it.
Brilliant. 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 Listen, I need to disconnect more often. What am I even doing here? Like, should I just excuse myself? Gentlemen, excuse me. All right. This is great. This is great. And Owen, I'm sorry I didn't get to respond to what you said before, because that was great, especially the deep canvassing example. I think it's powerful too, because it also shows a very interesting element of listening, because the person probably wouldn't have been willing to listen if they were not heard previously. And there's an interesting element between that combines both what you just talked about in this example and then what Simone was talking about just now. I'm not even going to argue. I'm not even going to say or do anything to attempt to change your perspective. I'm going to let you say your piece. I'm going to say my piece, and then I'm going to let essentially psychology do the rest. And I think there's something that is becoming very tangible to me right now, because I think a lot of times coming into these conversations, we make the mistake of not even knowing what it is that we want or need out of this interaction. Because when we get drawn into an argument, that's not so much about the outcome as much as it is feeling like I have the right to make your brain like mine. Can you go into that? Where does that come from, and what can we do to start to work our way around that?
I mean, I think ultimately we all want to feel like we've won, or we want to be victorious, or at the very least, we want to feel like it was fair, right? So there's been all sorts of research studies. I used to do these exercises in some workshops where you give people the choice that, one person wins the toss of a coin, and they get to choose out of $100 how much will they take and how much will they give to the other person. And the idea is that if you're in a position of power where you get to choose, what offer are you going to make? The catch is, if the person says no, neither of you get anything. So if I'm trying to negotiate with you, rationally, if I say, Kwame, I'll give you $1 and I'll take 99, the rational thing for you to do is to take that dollar, because it's either $0 if you say no, or $1, which $1 is better than zero. But most people will say no if it goes more than 70-30, right? So even though I could get, 25, dollars out of the 100, because it's not fair, because I'm like, you're only offering me 25, most people will say no when it gets over sort of 70-30 split. And that's an example of how the way in which we feel completely hijacks any attempt that we have to make the most rational, logical perspective. But there's also a sort of an evolutionary mechanism at play there as well, because if you think about it, we play this game now, you mess me over this time, what happens the next time when you're in a position of power? And so good practice from that perspective is always to look for the win-win. And that's something that has been with us since the dawn of time. It's about bargaining. It's about finding mutually agreeable solutions. Years ago, I did studied strategic negotiation at Harvard. And the main focus they talked about was making the pie bigger, finding ways to add value, making it so that it's not a sort of a distributive, grab your piece of the pie and try to bulldoze over the other person as much as possible. You're trying to find a way to make it work for both people. But I always like to think about the stories that, like you mentioned earlier, Kwame, is that there's the story that I'm telling you, there's the story you're telling me, but then there's the story that you're telling you and the story that I'm telling me. And there's also the story that I'm telling me about you. So in other words, as you're communicating to me, I'm telling myself a story about what that means. And as I'm communicating to you, I'm also telling myself a story about your response to that. So just pivoting back to the deep canvassing example, as I'm sharing my story and as I'm looking at your body language and you're nodding and you're looking earnest and you're asking questions, my brain is now formulating a belief about you in that very moment as I'm describing it. You're not saying a word. It's like when you go into negotiations and the person doesn't say anything. And it's like, Kwame, I'll give this to you for $20. And then you just stay silent. And then within a few seconds, I'm like, okay, $15. We'll do $15. And you stay silent. And I'm like, look, $10. Have we got to deal with that? Now, effectively, your silence has meant that my internal dialogue or my internal story is that I've been negotiating with myself over and over again, disrespecting myself sometimes. And as a result of that, it means now I've been taking away a lot of the power of the negotiation. So I think recognizing these stories is really important if we are to start to make smarter decisions around this, so we don't fall into the habit of allowing our feelings to hijack our reasoning.
This is so helpful. And when it comes to your background in hypnosis, how does that color your perspective on persuasion?
So I studied hypnosis when I was a teenager. I learned to become a hypnotist. I trained as a hypnotherapist, so I qualified there, but I also did stage hypnosis shows. Hypnosis is just a tool. So hypnosis is not this thing where you mind program people and all that sort of stuff. It's just a tool to be able to help people to tap into more, their brain in a more effective way, not a million miles away from, deep visualization or mindfulness or meditation. And it offers potential around being able to offer suggestions and whatnot. So it doesn't factor in a lot, but if you think about the feels right, fits in, and makes sense, a big part of hypnosis is about altering the state of the person. And so how you create the right kind of impact. Like my TED talk or my TEDx talk, it resonated quite a lot, but I did the entire thing in rhyme. So for 10 minutes, it's just me rhyming about propaganda and mind control, and it's the entire thing is just me rhyming. And there's a certain, I suppose, hypnotic effect of that I think lands in certain ways. Not great from a actual, like sometimes a memorability perspective, but sometimes good from a sort of a deeper impact perspective, from offering suggestions. But that's an example of like an altered state created by something. The greatest speakers out there, when you deliver a keynote, for example, every time you tell a story and you bring people into your world, you are hypnotizing them to a great extent. You're creating an altered state. And that's why stories tend to land much more powerfully. The moral of a great story tends to be resonating much deeper and for much longer a time than if we just communicate the same message. So I think you share a story, excuse me, Kwame, about your past and when you were younger and why you didn't always, stand up for yourself, and you stayed popular, but you gave in a lot. And that puts across a message so much more powerfully than it would do if you just said, hey, it's really important that you stand up for yourself, because the message becomes so much more empowered by the hypnotic experience that we find ourselves lost in when we're engrossed in your story.
Powerful. And let's go deeper on this. Let's go deeper into our hypnosis here,
Sure.
Owen. What are the things that people misunderstand about the concept and the benefits and potential risks? Again, because there are a lot of misconceptions out there.
Sure. So first of all, I think a lot of people think that, you can be brainwashed by hypnosis. You can be brainwashed. Hypnosis can be one of the tools, but So is deception. Deception is probably one of the biggest tools, lying to people about it, gaslighting people. There's all sorts of ways to manipulate people. But hypnosis can be used there, but ultimately hypnosis is generally used for good. It's a great way to be able to access more of your mind. It's great to be able to create like anesthesia. It's great for things like habits. But I always argue it's like an additional tool to put in your stack of tools. It's not something that you just, go all in. It's not like a panacea that will fix everything and cure everything. You're not conked out. It's not like you're like people snap their fingers. You're like, oh my goodness, or oh my goodness, I'm a superhero now, and I've got no like. There's an awful lot of over the top sort of intrigue in it because of movies and culture and whatnot. But it's ultimately about suggestion. So you get a person to fix their mind or create fixation where they're focusing on something. And when they're focusing on something, you're communicating with them, you're leading them into, let's say, an altered state where they're very relaxed. The theory is that, again, let's say if we use the metaphor of the conscious and unconscious or subconscious mind, the conscious mind is focusing on something and relaxed. Therefore, it's easier for you to offer suggestions to the subconscious. So there's lots of theories as to how it works. But neuroscientists have demonstrated that there definitely is like the altered state, and it does tend to, I suppose, lead us to be able to make certain connections that we wouldn't do otherwise. But I think whenever an athlete goes into a zone and they're like completely like in the zone, they're in the pocket, they're in that's as good a trance state as you'll ever see. That's as great a description of a trance state than anything that you'll ever see.
Brilliant. And when it comes to any of the elements of hypnosis, are there any of the tools or principles that we could use in our everyday life to communicate and connect and potentially persuade?
I would argue that we already do. I would suggest that when we articulate our message in a clear way, when we communicate in stories, every single time we lead people through an experience whereby we're not just using logic, we are accessing certain forms of, let's say, hypnosis. I think a lot more, it's like everything is propaganda. I think a lot more of life is hypnosis than we realize. And to a degree, every time we are experiencing propaganda, people usually use terms. Sometimes they say brainwash, but a lot of times they say, oh, they're hypnotized by the leader, right? Yeah. So we use it as a sort of a description or a metaphor to describe what happens when someone is, inverted commas, brainwashed or believes in something. But I think the trance state is a lot. In order for us to create this, it's not like if I'm in a negotiation with you, I'm going to go, okay, Kwame, I just want you to focus here as we talk about this mortgage. And I want you to think through from a real estate allocation perspective. That just doesn't work, right? Maybe we could make an argument for the, if you're in certain situations where there's a lot of uncertainty, the Jedi mind trick approach. Whereas in situations where people are experiencing a lot of uncertainty, the direct suggestion, when you demonstrate certainty, you demonstrate clarity and you say, these are not the droids you're looking for. This is the best deal on the table. When you say that with conviction, when you say that in that moment, that tends to be something quite important. Really quick example. Many years ago, I was driving home at night in Ireland and I came across a car accident. And there was 2 cars overturned, and the ambulance hadn't arrived yet. And so my friend went to one car, I went into the other. The person was trapped in the car, upside down. And so I leaned in, sort of crawled into the space, and I'm talking to them. And they were starting to panic and stress out. And I just took a state of authority, and I said, everything's going to be okay. You're going to be fine. This is what's going to happen. And I walked them through exactly what was going to happen. And they listened to me like they've never listened to anyone, because I knew they were in an altered state. I knew that they were like uncertain that things were going on. And I was demonstrating that commanding presence and saying things clearly. And as a result of that, they were hanging off every word. And then I was able to make a joke and change their state a little. And then when the ambulance came, this was the interesting piece, they did every single thing that I just did. And I didn't know, like I'd never obviously, spent time, working in that area. But they did it naturally, because obviously these are people are experts and they're heroes in terms of what they do every day. But once again, they knew clarity, directness in that moment, because the person is in an altered state and they're much more likely to respond in that way. And when people are panicked or anxious or, chaos is going on inside or outside, often directness, clarity, certainty is very appealing to them. And that's also what happens in propagandistic situations too.
Amazing. I think that's something that we can all take, because there are going to be times where it's appropriate to be warm and inviting. There's going to be times where it's important to sit back, be curious, and listen. There are going to be times where you invite more discussions. And then there are going to be times where it's time to kind of, you know, let's set the record straight and say something very directly. And I think when you have the ability to modulate your tone, to adjust your approach, and then take people on this journey, and then kind of drop the hammer, it gets people's attention. And it does have a kind of hypnotic type of approach, kind of response, because people will say, "Oh, whoa, that's different. I'm listening now." You know, I really like that. And before we go, because I know Simone always comes in and asks an insightful question. Now, I mean, after this episode, Owen, I might need to have like the Simone minute where he comes in
For sure.
and drops a gem too. But Simone, what question do you have for Owen?
Yeah. You just said that in order for someone to believe something, that has to feel right and that has to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, I had a friend that he said that he was fat because he felt guilty while eating, not because of the food, but because of the sensation he had while eating. And I think that's wrong. But for me, it is impossible to change his mind. Whatever I say is very difficult for me to make him believe that is actually the food and not his feeling of guilt. So, is there any way I can change someone's mind, even if the idea doesn't fit with what they believe? Owen, you just said that in order for someone to change a belief, it has to feel right and it has to fit in. So, for instance, I was having an argument with a friend maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. We both are overweight, right? So, we were talking about why we are overweight. And we had different reasons why. For me, we are overweight because we like to eat a lot. For him, we are overweight because he feels we feel guilty while we eat. To me, it doesn't make sense. To him, my idea doesn't make sense. So if I wanted to change his belief about why we are overweight, how can we do? How can I do? Or how should I proceed following these two guidelines that in order for someone to change a belief, it has to feel right and it has to feel good?
Sure. So the first question would be, what's your goal? What do you want to do?
My goal is to make him understand that maybe if he feels guilty, that's a problem. But if he eats a lot, like I eat a lot, that's a problem too. And if he wants to lose weight, one of the ways might be eating less. I am doing it because I want him to be okay.
Perfect. So in order to get him to do that, that's the belief that we want. We don't necessarily need him to believe what you're trying to get him to believe, that actually it's the food you eat that matters. What we want to get him to believe is that, number one, he needs to do this, and number two, he can do this. So they're the beliefs that we're working for, and they're the ones that need to feel right. Now, I'll just give you a quick example from a different example, and then I'll pivot back around to this one. Years ago, I was delivering a workshop for coaches, and I was offering the chance to be able to change their habits. And I said, anyone here want to change a habit and not being able to? And this lady comes up and she goes, Owen, let me tell you, I know how to stop smoking. I've done all the training. I read all the books. I know everything I need to do, but it doesn't work for me because I'm just a smoker. And I said, okay, cool. Can you come up? So she came up. I said, let me ask you, how many cigarettes do you smoke in a day? She said about 20. I said, cool. How many minutes do you spend, on each cigarette? She goes, I don't know, 3 or 4. I said, let's say it's 4. How many minutes a day do you spend smoking? She says, 80 minutes a day. I said, cool. So you spend 80 minutes a day. Yeah. Let me ask you, if someone came to you and they said, look, I've got 2 jobs. One job I do for 22 hours and 40 minutes and the other I do for 80 minutes a day. Which one would you be likely to describe them as? And she goes, well, the one that they're doing for 22 hours and 40 minutes. I said, so here's the thing. You're a non-smoker that smokes for 80 minutes a day. And in that moment, she sat back and she was just like, I never thought about it like that before. But the crucial piece was I saw her like 6 years later. She hadn't touched a cigarette since that moment. Now, why was she able to stop smoking? Because she knew what to do. But the thing that allowed her to stop smoking was her identity expanded. And she realized that she could still stop smoking. And she was actually a non-smoker. And the fact that she was smoking, that was just something that needed to tackle. But as long as she believed she was a smoker, she was trapped. So the key with regards to your friend would be, if we're talking about how he sees himself. So you would say, well, how do you see yourself? And what might he answer to that?
That is great, Owen. That was fantastic. That's so good. So good. I feel like you might want to write a book or 10.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Well, Owen, this has been fantastic. I know the listeners have gotten a lot out of it. And listeners, if you have made it to this point, that means you like the episode. Give Owen a shout out in the 5-star review. Just shout him out specifically. And Simone, too, who's going to jump in and hijack my episodes, apparently, which is great. And so, listen, this was fantastic. Let the listeners know how they can connect with you and remind them about the book and how they can get that, too.
Thanks so much, Kwame. And listen, I've loved the conversation with yourself and with Simone. It's been a real pleasure. I love the podcast. I think you're doing incredible work. If anyone is interested in learning more, please go to innerpropaganda.com. That's my new book. Would love it if you like anything that we've talked about today. I really feel that you're going to love the book. I put a lot of heart and soul into it. I'm very proud of it. It's called Inner Propaganda, Leading Hearts and Minds Through Turbulent Times. And it's innerpropaganda.com. And for me, I'm Owen Fitzpatrick, so owenfitzpatrick.com. I think I'm on the socials as well. And I have a podcast called Inner Propaganda as well. So in case anyone's podcast listeners, thank you so much again, Kwame, and thanks, Simone. I love this, and hope we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely. This is so good. Thank you.